The Biden administration is reducing its CHIPS Act grant to Intel from $8.5 billion to $8 billion. The change takes into account a $3 billion contract that Intel has tentatively acquired to produce chips for the U.S. military. This all coming against the backdrop of the Biden administration dispersing CHIPS Act funding before former President Donald Trump takes office. He's been a vocal critic of the CHIPS Act, of course. For more, we're bringing in Christopher Miller, author of Chip War, The Fight for the World's Most Critical Technology, and professor at the Tufts University Fletcher School. Chris, it's good to see you again. So let's talk about Intel first of all. And, you know, Intel sort of, which has been struggling to some extent. Does the weakness of Intel speak more broadly to the maybe uncertain footing of this attempt to reshore the U.S. chip industry?
Well, I think Intel has been pretty clear that they're delaying some of their manufacturing projects globally. In Germany, for example, they've really substantially pushed back project plans. I think in other parts of the chip industry, you've seen pretty rapid efforts to bring new capacity online. In Arizona, for example, the Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing company has just announced that it's got its manufacturing processes at the same level as their primary facilities in Taiwan. So it's a mixed picture, I think, looking across the industry, but there's certainly a whole lot of investment underway to bring new chip making capacity online in the United States.
So, Chris, with the incoming second Trump administration, would you expect to see any kind of meaningful changes to the CHIPS Act?
Well, I think it's worth remembering that it was the first Trump administration that devised the concept of trying to incentivize firms to build more in the U.S. The CHIPS Act was first discussed in Congress under the Trump administration. The first investment of TSMC, the Taiwanese company in Arizona, was announced under the first Trump administration. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see some small changes to the program. Specific grants might be amended, but the basic framework of trying to use financial incentives to get more chips made domestically, that's an idea the first Trump administration more or less came up with.
Is it an idea, now we're going into an administration that has talked much more about using tariffs, and there's been much less talk about those types of incentives. What, in your reporting and from what you've seen, is one more effective than the other? Are they more effective in concert? What do you think, how do you think it's going to play out?
I think what we've seen over the past two administrations, both the Biden administration and the first Trump term, is that you got the U.S. government using both tools, tariffs in certain segments of the industry, incentives in others. The Trump administration raised tariffs on imported semiconductors from China. The Biden team doubled the tariff rate from 25 to 50%. I wouldn't be surprised to see even more moves on the tariff front from the Trump administration when the president-elect takes power in January. I think, though, there's many segments of the industry where tariffs alone aren't going to be a viable solution. There's a small number of chips the U.S. imports from China. Those could well be targeted. There's a much larger number of chips the U.S. imports from Taiwan, which is a close economic partner. And many of the leading U.S. tech firms are the companies importing chips from Taiwan. And so it's much harder to imagine those imports being tariffed because it's big, successful, influential U.S. firms that are benefiting from those imports.
And Chris, on export controls, I'm curious, with this new Trump administration, what do you expect to see when it comes to export controls, Chris? And secondly, the point and purpose of those export controls, to stymie, to slow down China from becoming a global AI powerhouse. How bottom line effective are they?
Well, this is another policy tool set that was largely pioneered by the first Trump administration and then continued under the Biden administration. And indeed, there's a lot of discussion in the media that the Biden team might announce one final package of export controls that'll tighten up the rules even further before the administration ends. And I think we've seen Republicans, especially in Congress, all on the Biden team to enforce controls more aggressively, to close loopholes. And I wouldn't be at all surprised to see the Trump administration, when it comes into office, pursue that effort of tightening up those controls. I think it's very difficult to slow down the AI progress of a country that's as big and advanced as China. But when we see news stories about Chinese computer experts smuggling in semiconductors in suitcases into China, I think that gives a lot of people in the U.S. government confidence that they are really causing challenges to China's tech sector. It's not going to stop all progress, but is it helping to slow progress and giving U.S. firms an advantage? I think most people in Washington, regardless of party, regardless of which House of Congress, there's a conventional wisdom, I think, that controls are working. And I think if you look at the impact on China's chip making, as well as the impact on China's AI sector, that conventional wisdom seems right.